Good evening, everyone. I'm Sean O'Callaghan. I'm the planner with Algonquin Highlands Township. Welcome to this open house for our zoning bylaw review. Rick Hunter with Planscape will have a brief presentation regarding how we got to where we are today and highlight some of the changes proposed for this zoning bylaw. Following this meeting, please feel free to reach out to myself if you have any questions on how these changes may impact your property. And with that, I'll hand it over to Rick.
Thanks, Sean. I was wondering if you could share the screen with the presentation.
Yes.
And I'll basically be following that as we go through. This way there will be a bit of a visual for it as we go through it. Again, thank you for being here this evening, and I'm glad to have a chance to be speaking to you about the zoning bylaw review. We can go to the first slide.
Can you see it? Is it showing up now?
Yes, it shows it well for me.
Okay.
Okay, just thought we'd just go through a little bit of the background. Some of you may be aware the township updated its official plan in 2018, and that changed some of the rules and regulations that will apply to the zoning bylaw. And since then, the township's been working on coming forward with the updated bylaw. The bylaw process that we've been going through has a number of reasons for it. One is to meet changing provincial requirements. For instance, we'll be talking about having second dwellings on properties, again, part of provincial initiatives, to reflect some of the changes in the official plan. Some of those relate to how we're dealing with some of the environmental features in the township, and generally to update the bylaw itself, where through interpretations or through experience, certain things have or have not worked. So it's always a good time to take a look at that. The approach that's being taken on this particular application is to come forward with a new zoning bylaw, although probably about 75 to 80% of the bylaw is going to be carried over from the old bylaw. The review itself started around 2020, that's 2019, 2020, and there was extensive review with council members throughout 2021, resulting in the preparation of the draft bylaw that we're talking about tonight. The bylaw that is online is a red line strikeout version, where the colored portions are the changes that are being proposed to the bylaw. The sections that are in the standard black font are just a carryover from what's there now. The structure of the bylaw itself and the mapping approach is not changing. However, the map schedules have been updated to show proposed changes to the bylaw. The text of the bylaw has been updated to bring in the new provisions and modify some of the existing provisions. The draft bylaw has been available for review online since December 2021. The approach that I was going to take for the next short while is to just highlight some of the major changes that might be of interest. I've structured it on the basis of how the properties that are in different zones may be affected by some of the changes that are proposed. Before even starting into that, I would note that if anyone is watching, if you do have any questions about your own property, the best way to deal with that would be to contact Sean afterwards. Confirm the location of your property. He can then confirm the actual zoning and whether or not there are any constraints on it, and again whether or not the new bylaw is going to change the zone provisions or requirements as they relate to your property itself. So to a certain extent, this is a two-stage process. Today is just the introductory part, and then from there it'll just be a matter of calling in and confirming how something affects your property, actually your neighbor's property, or frankly any properties around your lake or in your surrounding neighborhood. So that will happen over the next short while as well. Again, I wanted to highlight some of the major changes. Probably one of the more significant ones in some of parts of the township are the changes affecting environmental protection zones. We've introduced an expansion of environmental protection zones based on different natural heritage features that are identified in the official plan, and that will be treated differently through zoning and what can be done on the properties. We've expanded from 1 environmental protection zone to 4 zones. The first one is standard environmental protection, and I've put the section cross-reference in bold on the page. It's section 5.1.3 of the bylaw. This zone reflects the existing environmental protection zones from the current bylaw, and for the most part recognizes unevaluated wetlands. This is what we call an overlay zone, where the underlying zone is still there. For instance, if you're on the shoreline and you're zoned shoreline residential 2, that zoning is still in effect, but you may have an environmental protection part over top of it. What that does is it kicks in a requirement for having an environmental impact study prepared before development can proceed on the property itself, before the rights from the shoreline residential zone can be used. The environmental protection 1 zone, a new zone, it reflects existing provincially significant wetlands. There are not, I don't recall how many there are exactly in the township. There are not very many, but where the provincially significant wetlands are identified, the zoning provisions require that there is no development permitted. It's consistent with provincial policy that says that within provincially significant wetlands that new development is not allowed. There are provisions, however, to deal with if there is existing development already there. The next section, environmental protection 2, is reflects areas of natural and scientific interest. This is also an overlay zone where an environmental impact study is required before development can proceed. Areas of natural and scientific interest can be natural heritage features. They can be earth sciences features as well, but and there are a few in the municipality. I will have a slide shortly that'll show how that shows up on Clear Lake in Sherburne. The environmental protection 3 zone, it reflects fish spawning areas at or near the shorelines. The zone provides for restrictions on docks and boathouses and establishes a 30-meter setback for new structures from the edge of the EP3 zone. Again, the fish spawning areas are identified to protect the fisheries resources around the lakes. The bylaw also sets out an environmental protection assessment area, which again is similar to an overlay zone where an impact study is required before development can proceed on a lot that is within that assessment area. And the provisions for that are found in section 5.1.2. Again, for sure, it will be important to check the zoning for shoreline property may be affected by the EP zones. This is probably one of the more significant changes that can affect your ability to get a building permit without going through various other processes. The next slide, again, is one of the schedules from the map. It's from Clear Lake, the Stanhope-Sherburne boundary. There's a large natural sciences or life sciences ANSI that is surrounding Clear Lake. The assessment area, another additional 30 meters is around that. You'll also see on the map that there are a couple of spots where there's a dark blue, almost a smudge on it opposite the one island. That's an identified fish spawning area that would have the restrictions that I was just talking about as well. So, again, that would deal with the environmental protection areas. There are a number of changes that affect the rural, the hamlet residential, and the rural residential zones that are in the bylaw. First one that I just wanted to touch base on was that the bylaw for those 3 zones will be permitting up to 2 apartments in a residential building, subject to the specific requirements that are set out in the bylaw. This is consistent with the direction that's been provided by the province on encouraging accessory apartments or more intensified housing on properties throughout the province. The second item is not in addition to, but in concert with the apartments in a residential building, would also be able to permit up to 2 accessory dwellings on a residential lot. So on a larger lot, it may be possible to have the main house and a garage that would have a second dwelling attached to or with it, and up to a third unit. I would note that the numbers, the maximum number of units cannot exceed 3 under whichever arrangement is made. You could have one apartment in a house and a separate coach house. That would be allowed in those zones, but you could not have five dwellings on one property. We've set up regulations to consider garden suites. Garden suites are a form of secondary housing or a form of accessory housing, but they are usually brought in on a property. They're temporary in nature. Historically, they've also been called granny flats, and it's oftentimes where it's used by a caregiver for specific periods of time. We don't expect them to be used very often, given the other provisions for being able to have the permanent second dwellings. But the province Planning Act does set out a number of criteria for allowing them, and we've carried that forward in the bylaw. Some of the items that I'm going to talk about now deal with some of the almost quasi-agricultural types of uses that may go on smaller sized properties. Council's been looking at regulating or providing permissions for having backyard beekeeping on lots, again within the rural residential zones, on lots over half an acre in size, and again subject to size and setback requirements that are set out in the bylaw itself. The next area is similar to that. The beekeeping is to permit backyard hens, again also on lots over half an acre in size, and again subject to size setback requirements for those uses. This has been something that a number of municipalities have been encouraging use of for more sustainable development around their properties and providing for different options. We've also defined and permit hobby farms, and they recognize farm uses that are on lots that are over 1 hectare or 2.5 acres in area. They're subject to standard, it's called MDS, minimum distance separation distances, where you're required to be a certain distance away from livestock operations. And it'll also limit limits on the number of livestock, depending on the nature of the livestock and the size of the property. I would note that the reason this is brought in is that the farm itself is normally defined as a property that's I believe it's over, I think it's over 10 hectares in size. So this covers that situation where you have smaller lots where you can have a limited number of agricultural uses, whether it's 1 or 2 horses or other livestock, additional chickens and such. Okay. There's some of the changes that will affect the shoreline residential zones around the lakes, and lots that have shoreline frontage. So that would include lots that are in any of the hamlet areas where they are fronting on a water body. There's a requirement that'll be installed to require that septic system leaching beds be located a minimum of 30 meters from the shoreline, unless they have an enhanced filter bed or tertiary treatment system, where the traditional requirement of 15 meters would apply. Again, this has become fairly consistent with a number of municipalities, as the distance of the leaching bed from the shoreline improves the potential for phosphorus protection and for the water quality protection of the surrounding lakes. There's a refinement to the definitions of boathouse and boatport in the bylaw, again, that adds some size limits to the length of a boathouse particularly. There's a provision in the bylaw that's been added in to recognize the potential to construct seasonal dwellings to lesser building code requirements for a seasonal recreational building defined in the building code in the SR2 zone. The SR2 zone, lots generally with access without public road frontage. These would not be permanent dwellings, and again, it's an option that the municipality feels is potentially of benefit to some of the more remote properties in the municipality. Okay. Another of the clauses that's being proposed is to limit the projection of a dock into the water to 20% of the width of a channel or 15 meters in length, whichever is the lesser. This is an attempt to ensure that docking facilities don't or would be less likely or don't interfere with navigation, particularly in narrow channels. So for the most part, on a lake that is fairly wide area, the 50-meter standard would apply. If you're on a narrow inlet or on a small river, then you would then look at which of those criteria would establish the setback or the length rather. Similarly, there'll be a new provision that limits the length of a dry land boathouse to 8 meters, which is about 26 feet. On it, there is no set minimum at the present time. There is an entire section on regulating the reconstruction of existing dwellings in the SR1 and SR2 zones. It will regulate the permitted increase in the gross floor area, the width or height of the dwelling based on the distance of an existing dwelling from the high water mark. So for instance, if your existing dwelling is 10 meters from the shore and the current standard is 20 meters, then there will be limits to how wide the cottage can be, or the new dwelling or replacement dwelling can be, and to its height and to its maximum size. So those are all covered off in a series of tables depending on how far the dwelling is from the shoreline. Okay, and there are a few other items that have come up that were of interest to council through the official plan and through the review of the bylaw itself. One of them deals with all the changes to cannabis production, and the bylaw is proposing to recognize that the growth and cultivation of cannabis plants is considered a farm use that's consistent with the province's position, Ministry of Agriculture and Food, that the actual growing of the plants is a farm use. However, we felt that it was important to recognize that a production facility that involves the processing or manufacturing of cannabis and related products be considered an industrial use, and they only be permitted in a general industrial zone. So that will indicate that any of the major processing of the product would be in obviously inside buildings and appropriately screened and regulated. The section 4.7 of the bylaw provides zoning requirements for those facilities, including special setbacks and prohibitions to outside storage. One of the smaller changes, but could have an impact on a lot of properties, is that there's a recognition that home occupations that are often held on individual residential properties may be located in an accessory structure and not just inside the main building. This would just add to some of the flexibility for home-based businesses. There are a number of other some editorial, some fairly minor changes. Again, they're all highlighted in red in the bylaw itself that are worth taking a look at as we go along. I just wanted to run through the next steps in the process following this evening's presentation. Staff and council will review the comments that are received through the public process to date. The intention is to bring a report to council summarizing the comments received at the council meeting on March 17th. The revised draft of the zoning bylaw will be released for review shortly after that, and in advance of the formal council public meeting, which is tentatively scheduled for April 21st. And the notice, as always, will be posted online and distributed according to the Standard Planning Act requirements. Following the public meeting, the final version of the bylaw will be prepared and submitted to council for adoption, again, tentatively scheduled for May 19th of this year. Anyone who is watching this and is interested in receiving the notice should be submitting the request to the municipality as well. Then you get on the list to make sure that you're not missed on any of the other general approaches. Usually when a bylaw such as this is notice is given, it's usually in the newspaper. It's recognized that you may not see a newspaper advertisement as quickly. So if you do have any interest at all or know any of your neighbors who are interested potentially in the bylaw, then ask them to call into the township and get on the list. I guess that's all for my presentation. John, if there are any other comments?
No. Thank you for that, Rick. Yeah, I would just reiterate if anyone has any questions or comments on the proposed changes to please reach out to myself, and I'd be happy to have those discussions with you then. But with that, I believe that concludes our open house for this evening, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you.